everybody's week? Good, good. Was everybody up late watching the Mizzou game last night? Everybody seems a little, huh? No? They won, Don. Come on. They did. They did win. It was, yeah. Yeah. Yep. So they're 7-3. So for Mizzou, that's pretty good. Music City. Well, hey, short trip to Nashville to go watch them play. That would work. Okay. Alrighty. Well, as you guys know, we are creeping through Nicodemus. Brian's giving me a little trouble that we're on Nicodemus again today, but plan is to wrap up Nicodemus today, and then hopefully, I kind of went out of order of the book based on some similarities and some kind of things that I think went along well with the Nicodemus study. We're going to jump up and do the rich young ruler next, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully we'll get into the rich young ruler. If we do, we do. If not, we'll talk about it next time we have class. Next Sunday, we will have class. I won't be teaching. Barney Crawford from Fairhaven will be up to give a report on the work at the children's home, and then he'll also be preaching for us AM. So looking forward to seeing Barney. He's a great guy. So before we get into our study, though, I wanted to open up with a prayer. Anybody have anyone we need to specifically mention in our prayers?
My mom will be having surgery on skin cancer on Wednesday.
Mary's having surgery this Wednesday. Okay. Remember Mary, please, in her surgery for Wednesday. Where's that at? Where's she going to be?
It'll be first patients.
Okay. Okay.
Doctor's office.
Okay.
Jill has her appointment with her doctor on Wednesday for treatment.
Okay. Okay. So Jill and Mary. Anybody else? Yes, Mark?
My son, Ben, is facing some legal stuff with custody of his daughter. No problem, Jim, just pray.
Sure. So also remember Ben as he goes through that. Trace, would you mind starting us off with a prayer?
Almighty Father, we're grateful for this time we have to study from your book, and we ask you to be with Steve and help him with response as he conveys what he has studied, and help us to have open hearts. We're grateful for this time that we have to really get ready for our worship hour in the next hour, and we're grateful for each one that's here. We're thankful for our visitors. Thank you to our teachers, for those that are in classes and teaching and imparting your word to our kids. We know they're a gift that you give to us, and we pray that we can give them back. Be with those that were mentioned. Unfortunately, wasn't able to hear everybody, and being out in the fellowship area, be with those that were mentioned. Whatever their needs and wants are, and be with those family members, watch over them, help us. And so often we can pray, people may not know that we're praying, and that's the most beneficial. We're grateful that you hear our prayers. We're grateful for this avenue of prayer. Thank you for creating us. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for the Holy Spirit that he intercesses on the prayers, that what I'm saying makes sense. And we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, so we will be picking up back in John 3. We've read the full account a few times, but just so we are fresh on what we're going to be talking about this morning, would somebody mind reading verses 16 through 21 of John 3? verse 16 through 21 in John chapter 3.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. And this is the condemnation: light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because they know their evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen that they have been done in God.
Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. So last week we left off discussing John 3:16. Talked about that passage. How great of a passage it is, and yet kind of we feel like it's almost stolen from us a little bit because of its misuse by other religions, and it's kind of disappointing, disheartening for us to not have, I don't say not have, but not use that passage as readily as we might want to or should to remind us of, because it does remind us, or it tells us just how great God's love is for us. And it's important for us to be reminded of that. Moving on from there, we'll pick up in verse 17. Verse 17, just to remind us, for God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. So, Jesus is reminding or telling Nicodemus here what his purpose is. First, he states what his purpose is not is, and what is that? What was not the purpose for God sending Jesus into the world in verse 17? Judge, right? That God's purpose for sending Jesus here was not to judge the world. As we look at what God's purpose was for Jesus, obviously it's in a different manner, but we can also take or apply to us that our purpose for being here is the same purpose. What was the purpose? Later in verse 17, what was the purpose Jesus was sent here for? That the world might be saved. Obviously, Jesus had a lot greater effect on that, but would you agree that our purpose as Christians also includes that? That obviously Jesus is how they are saved. He is the reason their sins can be forgiven. But as Christians, do we have a responsibility, or is it part of our purpose in helping the world be saved?
Yes.
Yes.
You look at conversion of Saul. Jesus met him on the road. Jesus had the power to save him right then. He didn't. He said, go and you'll be told what to do. So then Jesus sent Ananias, a man, to tell Saul what to do. So therefore, God sending us to tell the world.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting that before, I totally agree with you, Donald, that it is part of our purpose or part of our mission for the world to be saved through us, right? They don't receive forgiveness of sins through us. That's only through Jesus. Please don't misunderstand me. But part of our mission is to realize that the world is lost and to provide the saving message of Jesus to them, and to live in a way that, as we've talked about in previous lessons, they can see God's love demonstrated through us. And that will hopefully encourage them to come to Him and know Him and want a relationship with Him so they can be saved. But I think it's super interesting that He doesn't just go in and say, this is my purpose. He first says what His purpose is not. And I think we can draw a lesson from that. And if we want to be successful in our purpose of being there to help the world be saved, then our purpose is not to judge either. Let's flip back to a passage we're all very familiar with, Matthew chapter 7. Here it's coming to the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount here. Would anybody mind reading verses 1 through 5 from Matthew 7?
Judge not that you be not judged, for with that judgment you judge, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, will be measured back to you. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not consider the plank in your own eye? For how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye, and look, a plank is in your own eye? Hypocrite! First remove the plank from your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye.
Okay, thanks, Donald. So we see in our passage in John that Jesus is telling Nicodemus his purpose, and for the purpose of our study, our purpose is not to be here to judge. We also see that echoed here in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, that we're not to judge. What is the key, or what should our focus be instead of judging others? What does this past Jesus' words in Matthew tell us our focus needs to be? Yeah, not on the faults of others, but on how I can improve myself. And maybe not only that, but if I see a fault in another, what can I do to help them overcome that? You know? Would you guys think it's a fair statement to say that for whatever reason, we as human beings prefer to look at others' faults rather than our own? Is that fair to say? Is it easier to look at and point out other people's faults than our own? Yeah? Why would that be? Why do you think that is?
We don't have to do any work.
Okay? That's valid. I think that's a good one. Any others?
It's easy to blame others.
Okay? We don't have to take the blame then. We can kind of push it off on others. That's a good one. Are you raising your hand or stretching? Okay. There you go. I like it.
I think whenever you criticize others, you can try to use that as justification for yourself.
Okay.
It's like you talk about everything else, so it puts all the spotlight on that, not on the
Okay. So kind of like, are we trying to maybe make ourselves feel better about our own mistakes? Say, well, this person does that, so maybe I'm not as bad. Is that kind of where you're going?
Yeah.
Did you have something, Bill?
Yeah, I've been watching some war stories on Facebook, and they had, most every one of them's got something about judging other people. And the reason is you go into a place, and there's a bunch of people in here, and the first one you see is you look at, and they're maybe a little dirty, their clothes are not as good, and you judge them harshly because of the way they
Yeah. We touched on that a little bit last week, and really saw that, again, some of us went down and saw David last week, and that was a huge thing, right? Whenever God picked to anoint him as king, he was the last one out of his brothers that they expected to be anointed, right? And because of the physical appearances, and yet, looking through God's lens, he was just the man for the job, right? And that's what we have to not look through physical lenses, but the spiritual lens and what's on the inside. Yes.
I think another thing is that it's easier to see a problem in someone else than yourself.
Okay. Why?
I think because we're not looking at ourselves that way.
Okay. So, okay. Yes, Jerry.
That really indicates he has been talking, got a bigger problem than what he's looking at.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point too, right? Our faults we want to minimize, right? Although they may be a log, but that speck in our brother's eyes, we want to dramatize that one, right? So that's a good point. Yeah. Very true. Yes, Val.
I think too, with ourselves, we judge ourselves by our intentions. If I meant
Sure.
to send the 3 get well cards and I didn't have to do it, so I don't see if I didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I know I meant to.
Yeah.
So you let her know.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and that might we know that we meant well with it, but just didn't execute well, right? And maybe that helps us have a little more compassion on others if we can understand maybe they had good intentions but just didn't execute well. So that's a really good point. Yeah. And when we don't execute those good intentions well, we appreciate when we're given mercy for that. So let's be willing to give that same mercy to others. Very good. How about, let's look at Galatians 6:1. This is a passage to tell us how we do react by not judging. When we say don't judge, we're not this is not God instructing us to bury our head in the sand and think everybody's good, they never do wrong or anything like that, right? But this passage in Galatians 6:1 will give us some guidance or instruction on how we do handle it, Somebody want to read that verse for us?
Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one with the spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted.
Okay. That was very well heard. Thank you. Yeah, but that is the attitude we need to approach if we see someone who's at fault or maybe struggling with a sin in their life, not to judge them, right, as we've talked about in these passages before, but we do need to approach it and address it with gentleness. What does that look like, approaching it with gentleness? Or would somebody have in mind any examples of where maybe something's been approached in a judgmental manner versus approached in a gentle manner?
Well, you can't be gentle if you go in there and start hollering at them and screaming at them.
Okay?
Because of what they do or look like. But if you have someone that's down and out, and you go in and talk to them normally, you do a lot more to it, find out a little bit, and maybe it's your job to help them.
Yes.
You go in with brotherly love.
Okay. Yep.
If we're going to them in gentleness, aren't we assuming they don't know they're doing something wrong? Otherwise, we would be going to them and saying, how can I help you with this, rather than telling them again what they already know.
maybe. I mean, I
I
think,
mean, sometimes you know people already know something that they're doing is wrong, they already know, but they're still doing it anyway, then I think it would be different. It would be going to them and saying, how can I help you with this, or is there something I can do, rather than telling them again something they already know. I mean, a lot of people know what they're doing is wrong, you know? I don't
yeah,
know.
yeah. I think if it's sin and ignorance, you're definitely going to handle it differently than a willful sin. But I think in both circumstances, you're still going to want to do it in a gentle manner.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So,
Unfortunately, Steve, I don't, a lot of men, they don't have that gentleness. I think you'll find more men that are probably gruff, maybe unapproachable, and that's probably something that a lot of men have to work on. Another, I think growing up in the church, or at least here, there may be that, I don't know, if attitude or of being maybe more judgmental than what we should be. So I think that's something, that is also another thing that we have to work on as far as to be, because we're always told, well, be prepared to give an answer. If we have to refute error, oh, where you were, you know, error, whatever it is, you know, and it's something that, you know, love, joy, peace, you know, you look at those fruits of the Spirit there, but almost, you know, we have to work on all that. I mean, it's something that we have to make sure that we keep that in check, but it's easier said than done. I mean, I don't know.
yeah. It absolutely. Oh, sorry, Dan. Go ahead.
Okay. Matthew 7:12 comes to my mind,
Yep.
how would I want them to approach me
Yeah.
if I were in their shoes?
Yeah.
And, some people say, well, I'd want to be really direct. Well, maybe I would, but probably not.
Yeah.
I'd want them to come at me within gentleness and love. And I find a lot of times when this type of thing happens, if you'll come in and say, this has been brought to our attention or my attention, what's going on, and just let them tell what's going on, and they may not even realize. There may be something they just don't know that they're this whatever it is, and they may realize. I think Anna said, a lot of times they know. Yeah, I know I'm doing this, but I'm doing it for this reason. And maybe you find out, okay, are you willing to change? Are you willing to do the way God wants you to do it? And so I think there's so many ways to approach it. You almost want to approach it with, I don't know everything, instead of assuming that you know everything. And it's kind of that, well, I'm dating myself, but kind of that Columbo attitude, like, I really don't know, even though you may know some things, you may not know the whole story.
Yeah.
And so go in, letting them express themselves. And I think if they feel like they're heard and you feel like you care about their side of it, and you're not just taking a particular side, you're listening to everything, and go from there. I think a lot of people are more apt to say, okay, yeah, I need to make a change, or they may, of course they may very well say, I don't think I need to make a change, and then that's, another conversation. But the gentleness part, I agree, it's a skill. It's not always natural for everyone to have that gentleness or approach everything with gentleness and calmness. We do kind of let our emotions dictate how we're going to speak, and how, instead of checking it. And I think of Jesus often in that regard. Jesus was so meek and gentle, but he certainly you can show them what the Bible says and allow them time to process that and make a good and proper decision to be more dedicated to God and come back to God, if that's the case.
Yeah. Yes.
I think it matters who comes to you too. If
Sure.
you have a relationship with that person and you know that person wants what's best for you and cares about you and wants your life to be better, rather than a random person who, you know, you've said right in passing coming up to you and saying, here's what's wrong with your life. I think that's a huge part of it, and knowing their intention
Yeah.
rather than just them trying to straighten you out or whatever.
Good point, Jerry. You had something?
And anytime the conversation gets hostile on either side, stop it right there and just leave it. That'd be my advice. Come back to me.
It's good advice. Sometimes it's hard to do that, but it's very good advice. Yes.
Let me piggyback with Jerry that said that about, it depends on who it is. That's why it's so important as Christians, in a group of Christians, is to be in each other's lives and get to know one another. So that when something like this does happen, you do know they care about you and they want the best for you. So, yeah, there's so many things that are tied together within Christianity, and that's certainly one of them. If, you know, I agree with that, sentiment completely. We need to be knowing what's going on in each other's lives as much as possible. Not that we have to tell everything, of course not, but we need to be aware of things going on, because how can you help anyone if you're not aware? And at the same time, we need to be kind of open to be willing to share, you know, when we have problems. You know, how can anyone help you if they don't know? You can't do anything about something you don't know anything about. So I like that we want to share prayer requests and things like that. That's a big deal. And there's so much about Christianity that people from the outside looking in don't understand. And one of those things is to love one another. I've got to know my fellow brother and sister. How am I going to love someone if I don't get to know them as much as I can?
Good point. As I was sitting there listening to you guys make comments, all very good comments, but one thing I was thinking about is if I care enough to come to you and bring a fault to your attention, I better also care enough to come to you with compliments and acknowledgments of your successes, right? I think that kind of gets into the point Anna was making as far as that relationship that's there, right? If I've come to a person 15 times and complimented, said, you did a great job on this, you know, this, that, and the other, and then I come to you this one time and say, hey, man, you need to pick it up here, right? I saw this, you know, and do it in a loving way. I feel like that would be received a lot better than if the first time I come to you with anything is a complaint. Would you guys agree with that?
I know when, yeah, and Dan probably knows this too, in management of like, you know, business or whatever, there's something that was said that you had to give 6 compliments to balance out 1 negative comment.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you gotta, you know, gotta give them the goods first, and then maybe hit them with something that they may not like.
Right. But either way, and that's a good, you know, like guide or something to keep in our minds. And even when we approach somebody with that gentleness to bring up an issue, I think we all probably experienced one way or the other. It's also good to highlight some positives while you're doing that, and sometimes that helps how it's received. But all this gets into my next point really well. I feel like how we approach a person who may have an issue in their life basically gets down to what is our motivation for contacting this person about it? Am I contacting them to be judgy, to show them that I'm better than you, to make them feel bad? Because if I'm approaching them for that reason, it's probably going to come off as, demanding, abrasive, and with characteristics that are going to really push them away. But if I'm truly coming to them because I see this in their life and I feel like it could cause separation between them and God and ultimately their eternal salvation, and I want them to be right, I'm coming to them with a pure motive, that's going to affect how I approach that, right? That's going to encourage me to use that gentleness and the love when I come to them and say, hey, I see this. What can I do to help you with this, right? Because I want what's best for you. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm not saying this to say, I'm perfect and you're not. I'm saying this because I want to help you get to heaven, right? And when we approach it with that motivation, I think that will breed the proper attitudes to approach them with it. Anything on that? So verse 17 does a really good job of Jesus telling us what his purpose was, and for the purpose of our study so far, we've kind of applied that to what our purpose is as well, obviously in a different manner. But if you think about it, has anybody ever had the opportunity to send their child into a store with a specific purpose of getting one item? Have you ever been the child or been the parent sending a child in? Aaron? Yes. You have? Okay. Have you witnessed this at Schnucks?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Probably.
So, do you want to give your scenario? You said you have as a child. What was your scenario? Do you remember the specific item?
I can't remember what it was, but if you're going with the does the kid come back out with just that item and the right item?
Mhm.
It's something completely wrong.
Yes.
5 extra things. I always brought the one singular item I was requesting.
Maybe his dad will remember.
Yeah? Yeah.
No, I didn't.
But I'm sure we've all, in some way, shape, or form, are familiar with this scenario. Parent sends a kid in, go get us a loaf of bread, and come right out. Here is the $1 to buy the loaf of bread. Okay. And they come out, there's not one piece of bread to be found, but a pocket full of candy, right? The kid missed the purpose, right? What is the parent's reaction going to be? Upset, right? When God has given us a purpose, and that is to see that the world is saved. With that purpose, are we going in and getting that loaf of bread? Is our focus and our purpose driven to accomplish that purpose he has given us? Or are we spending our time on this earth picking out candy? Or in other words, are we spending our time on this earth for our own purpose instead of his? We understand how upset we would be as the parent if that happened. I think it's fair to realize or understand how God would be upset with us if we're missing and not fulfilling his purpose for us here. All right. I'm going to go ahead and skip a point or two so Brian's not on me too much. No, didn't get the eye. All right. So getting back into Nicodemus, we see all of this stuff that Jesus has talked to Nicodemus here, and we're getting to the end of the passage, and Nicodemus is caught in this turmoil, right? He's caught in the decision of doing what he knows is right or doing what is easy. And that's so relatable, right? We maybe not in the exact circumstances, but we've all have that dilemma almost on a daily basis. Are we going to do what we know is right and follow God, or are we going to do what's easy and go in and buy that pocket full of candy? Right? Out of our study on Nicodemus, whether that's in our breakdown of the text in John 3, or when we watched the clip from The Chosen on it, what stuck out to you guys the most about Nicodemus and what he's going through in this moment, right? Currently, or in this portion of text. Any? Huh? He showed up. Okay.
He said, "We know who you are." I think does he not use like the plural?
We know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just includes others.
Mm-hmm.
He's the only one who showed up. Now, is that because they're just like, oh, we'll just send one guy, or is it because everyone else was too scared to even show up and come?
Mm-hmm. Anything else? Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, Nicodemus was a fairly rich person. He's been listening and actually being taught, I guess, because he knows that Jesus, when he's come to him, is teaching something different than what he's learned all of his life, probably. So he's trying to get to the point of, what do I have to do to be saved? Basically, that's what I get. That what has he got to do to be saved? But he's letting this money deter. He's letting his physical wealth and earthly wealth deny the opportunity to have spiritual wealth.
Yeah. Yep.
I just had a thought that popped in.
Mm-hmm.
Is he really any different than we are?
No.
Because he's struggling with something, whatever it is, if it's the money thing or whatever. Each one of us has probably been through a period in our life, maybe currently, where there's that one thing that we're struggling with. And what I get out of Nicodemus is that he struggled, but if we see the end of the story, which is he comes with Joseph comes and brings the spices at the end. And so we see him there at the end of the story, so to speak, where he's doing right. So he's been struggling with all this, and he continues to struggle, but in the end, you still see him doing what appears to be right. And that's no different than us. The big thing is if we're struggling with something, we got to keep hanging in there, and we just got to keep battling and battling. And again, hopefully in the end, God will see us as being redeemable.
Yeah. Good point. So the two, does anybody else have any that jumped out at them about Nicodemus? The two that really jumped out at me, and one we talked a lot about already, is the patience. Jesus and his patience with him. One, in how many times he's kind of gone through this, and it's stuff that Nicodemus should know, but also Dan and Jerry both alluded to this. We sometimes want people to understand it and change right now, right? And Jesus didn't force that on Nicodemus. He's willing to be patient with him, give him time to understand the message, right? And don't we truly want that? We want people to truly understand what they're doing, right? I don't at all. I think we have the best intentions when when we are kind of impatient, because it's an important, it's an important decision for somebody to obey Christ, and they're in a lost state, and you want them to be saved as soon as possible, but it's also very important for them to grasp the depth and importance of that decision. So to be willing to give them time to be patient with that is extremely important. The second, and this was, I thought, illustrated or demonstrated very well in the video, how bad did it appear Jesus wanted Nicodemus to follow him? He wanted him to come with him. Did he make him? Absolutely not. He was patient and gave him the choice. But the one thing I want us to remember or realize is that same desire Jesus had for Nicodemus to follow him is the exact same way Jesus feels towards us. Jesus wants us as his followers just as much. Jesus wants a relationship with us. Jesus wants to save us. Are we willing to do what he asks of us to allow him to do that? I was thinking a lot about this turmoil that Nicodemus was in, and was kind of equating that to obviously the time when I decided to be baptized, and thinking about that. And it reminded me, and I've talked to Esteban about this. I wish he was in here so he could share it himself, but he's shared it with us, and he's given me permission to talk about his story. But he tells a story, like him and Nancy were dating, and he started studying with, I believe it was Nancy's brother and preacher, where they were going, and he said he believed it was true, and he knew he needed to be baptized, but he didn't get baptized right away, because his mom and dad and really all his family were Catholic, and he knew that was going to cause a huge problem for him with his family, and possibly to the point where they wouldn't have anything to do with him anymore. So I feel like that's a really relatable situation to what Nicodemus is dealing with here. Like, there is going to be a very big cost for me to make this decision to put on Christ. And I know, and obviously Esteban had strong enough faith to make that decision, and I think it's commendable, and I know a lot of other people have had to make similar decisions, and I have a ton of respect for that, because, and I was talking to Anna about this, like, that wasn't the way for me. I grew up in the church, and really the only concern I had when I got baptized was how many people were going to come up and hug me, right? Like, it was not, there was really no physical cost involved in it, right? But there are people who have to make decisions like that of, I am willing to walk away from family, jobs, so many things, and I have a ton of respect for people who make that decision, because it really does show their commitment. And in a way, I'm almost, this can kind of sound weird, but I'm almost envious of people who have had that experience, because I feel like they have a lot better appreciation for what Jesus has done for them. And I think, don't get me wrong, I definitely appreciate Jesus' forgiveness and things like that, but I just, it seems like there's a greater realization for what they were rescued from. And I admire that and kind of envy that in a way. So anyways, I think that is all the comments I have on Nick. Oh, no, it's not actually, but Donald kind of hit on it. We do have, in John chapter 3, we're kind of left hanging on what does Nicodemus do? Does he respond well or not? But we are given some indication that he did choose to follow Jesus. John chapter 3, of course, Nicodemus believes, but he's coming to Jesus at night because he's not 100% sure of where he's at. John 7, we see him speaking up for Jesus and defending him in front of his fellow Pharisees and members of the Sanhedrin. Then John 19, Donald referenced, after Jesus dies, he goes and helps take care of the body, Jesus' body, right? And that's a pretty special time too, because it almost looks like Jesus had been defeated and maybe may not have been the one he claimed to be, but Nicodemus still believed that he was, even after the death. So we see a great progression in Nicodemus's faith, and we see that by the actions he's willing to do, right? So we can hopefully see the same thing. As our faith in Jesus grows, our actions and obedience to God, there should be a noticeable change in that as well. So just as Nicodemus had a progression in his faith, hopefully we're striving to have a noticeable change or noticeable progression in our faith as we continue to study and get closer to God and obey Him and please Him in everything we do. So thank you again for all your time and your comments today.